Welcome to the Innovation Ecosystem Podcast. We interview remarkable and thought-provoking guests about innovation, leadership, and change in the world of business. Whether you're an executive or an entrepreneur, our objective is to help you and your organization create an entrepreneurial culture, become more innovative, and better able to respond to change. Each week, we'll deconstruct world-class performance from the arenas of business, academia, science, and sports. Each week, you can expect key insights, fresh perspectives, and proven tools you can use straight away to make you more successful professionally and personally. With your hosts, Mark Bidwell and Roddy Miller.
So I hope you enjoyed hearing from Scott Pelton last week, the expert in helping us achieve our full potential. And in addition, I'd love to hear from those of you who actually downloaded some of the tools that he made available for us. You can get them on our website, www.innovationecosystem.com. In particular, there's a couple I'd like to call out. One is the work-to-home transition visualization, which is so powerful for anyone struggling with how do you actually switch off from work and engage with your family life in a regular, systematic and effective way. And secondly, the protocol for travel. For those of us who travel significantly, this is a really useful set of guidelines for how do you actually maintain your energy in the context of significant amounts of travel. So this week, I'm hugely excited to release this interview with Kevin Kelly, who's, amongst other things, the co-founder of Wired magazine and author of an amazing and important new book called The Inevitable. Now, Kevin was at the top of the list of guests for this show that I wanted to interview when we came up with this concept, given the breadth and depth of his knowledge and interests. We covered a lot of ground in our conversation. We talked, for example, about what he believes to be the surefire formula for the next 10,000 startups. And this is equally relevant whether you're an entrepreneur or whether you're an intrapreneur in a large organization responsible for innovation. He echoes earlier guests like Lisa Bedell by emphasizing the importance of questions, as well as describing what he believes the role of leadership will look like and how it will evolve in the years ahead. So if you want a glimpse of the future from arguably the most prescient and accomplished technology commentator alive today, and more importantly, what it means for us as innovators and entrepreneurs, you're in for a real treat.
Welcome to the Innovation Ecosystem. With me today is Kevin Kelly. Kevin, I have to say, when we planned this program, you were the first person that I wanted onto the show. So I'm really pleased that we managed to find some time in your calendar. And thank you very much for making that time.
It's my pleasure, really.
So Kevin, you described, I think, your work as packaging ideas into books, websites, and making them interesting and pretty. And before we get into your new book, The Inevitable, can you give our listeners a sense of your backstory and secondly, what a typical week looks like for you?
Yeah, I was a science nerd in high school, but also interested in photography and the arts. Couldn't decide whether to go to art school or MIT. In the end, I decided to be a college dropout. And instead, because I read the Whole Earth Catalog, I was inspired to make my own education and went to Asia, where I awarded myself a graduate degree in Asian studies by roaming around for 8 years, mostly photographing the disappearing traditions of Asia. And I also caught a really bad dose of optimism in Asia, because right before my eyes, I saw people lifting themselves out of poverty very, very quickly and becoming from some of the poorest nations of the earth to some of the richest ones. And
this was the 70s, was it, Kevin?
This was in the 70s, right, exactly. So I came back in the 80s and was writing about travel because that's something I knew about, and got myself invited on the earliest experimental online systems in the very early 80s, in 1981 or something. And I was reporting on it as if it was a new foreign country, like a travel reporter. And I saw something for the first time, which was high technology that was very human and organic. Until then, I kind of bought into the general drift of sort of the hippies, which I kind of was, which was, big technology, steamrolling humans, very inhumane. It was, us versus them. But with this emergent online thing in the early 80s, I saw a different side of technology, and I became very convinced that this was the future, and that the stuff that we were making could actually have kind of a more organic sensibility. And that led me back to the Whole Earth catalog, where I had my first job. We got involved in making the first public access to the internet, and I started reporting on this frontier, and became more and more interested in the future as a general phenomena, as something that we had an obligation to both make more of and to become, literate in. And so, I was involved in publishing a magazine, doing the first hackers conference, the first cyberthon, which was a 24-hour demo in 1989 for VR, all these other kinds of things. So that I became very involved in talking about and publishing stuff about the future, and eventually was involved in launching Wired in 92, 93, and then edited that for a while until I decided to write my first book called Out of Control, and I've been writing books since then.
Yeah. And one of the ones that particularly my kids love, as I do, is Cool Tools, which is a quite remarkable book. And I guess that's based on the original Whole Earth catalog, right?
Right, which was a kind of a large catalog, kind of like a Sears Roebuck catalog of tools that were, in the broadest sense of anything that was useful for self-empowerment, self-education, doing it yourself. And it ranged from tools to build your own house, to beekeeping tools, to homeschooling tools, to how to travel and hitchhike around the world, all that kind of stuff. And so that ceased publication right after I left the Whole Earth Foundation, but I continued it on my own website, which was called Cool Tools, and that's still going today, where every weekday a reader will recommend and review one tool per day, one useful thing per day, and that still is going on. I did the best of book that you're talking about, which is aimed at young people who, like me, might read it and realize that there's a lot more things they can do with their lives and with the tools available, and there's a lot more things accessible if you have the right tool.
And I guess this is the optimism that you referred to, which seems to be a common theme, and it's very much in the book, your new book, The Inevitable. But what was it that you saw, in the early days that gave you that sense of optimism around technology? Because I guess back then, I probably couldn't even spell the word technology. I was being a bit younger than you. But what gave you this sort of sense of optimism about technology when the interfaces were so basic and so few people were talking about these things in any coherent way?
Yeah. So computers were big, large machines that were impenetrable and kind of alien. There was no interface to them, really. They were just sort of these mysterious calculating things. And then what happened was, and computers as standalone devices didn't really change very much. That you could do word processing on them. But the real thing that kind of spurred both the great prosperity that we have right now and the kind of leap forward and my own optimism was when the computer was married to the telephone. It was that communications aspect of it, and I think communications is the foundation of society. Mm-hmm. It really is. It's not just books and stuff, but it's things like libraries and these are all ways to communicate ideas and connect us together, which is really what a society is. Exchange, even money is a kind of a communication. And so when we had this sort of new kind of communication, which was being amplified in all these different dimensions, that's what made me optimistic that we're actually kind of amplifying society for the first time. We were now taking in new directions. We're now having new levers to pull. We have new engines to make new ways to communicate. So it was the fact that we were messing around and in some ways innovating in communication. And for some reason that seemed like not just another sector, but that was the main event, and that was so big. And I felt that in the early online communities, the very first experimental communities. One of the things that was we called them virtual communities, and there was this initial kind of suspicion or worry that these are just pimply teenagers in their basement being asocial. And but what I saw was different. I mean, yes, it was them, but the communities were real. I mean, they were as real as any other kind of community, even though they were virtual. And so that sense of like, no, there's really something happening here. There's really engagement. There's really friendships. There's really there's something real in socially in this. It was not asocial at all, and that was what gave me this optimism that we had here a kind of a foundation for what I would call a very organic, very human scale kind of technology that operated at room temperature and that was, kind of like the normal social pressure, and then that was going to be really big, and so it was these early communities that I really felt that my optimism was based on.
And then fast forward to today. I mean, your new book, The Inevitable, describes 12 forces, technology forces that have been, you say, in motion for some time. They have their own momentum, and you say in a rather sort of all-expansive term, they will transform all aspects of our lives. So can you introduce us to these themes and what they might mean for our listeners who are mostly corporate executives, intrapreneurs, and entrepreneurs? What are the forces, and what do you mean by the transformation? How radical will this transformation be, if you like?
One of the ones I did not mention, but is an example, is decentralization, which has been going on for at least a couple of decades with this new technology, and will continue. So a lot of the things that we're seeing today are the effect of decentralizing things that were done in a central way. And the great example, the latest two examples are like Airbnb and Uber, which you instead of having a service that is a taxi service that's centralized, you can do one that's decentralized. It's like peer-to-peer. You have the users do most of the work. Airbnb is another example where it's the largest lodging company in the world that owns no real estate, just as Uber is the largest taxi cab company that owns no cars. And it's done because you can use these new communication technologies to provide the kind of coordination and collaboration that's necessary to decentralize something. So the general drift of decentralization has been going on, but it's going to continue even more. I mean, we haven't really even begun to do it in some senses. And all this technology that we're making, carrying these little communication devices in our pockets, allows us to do things in a way that we haven't done before, and that's going to continue. The kinds of things I talk about in the book are things like screening. So screening is sort of what we do with screens, and screens have been around for a while with the TV screen. But what happens is that we've moved from being people of the book, which was where texts, text, immovable, fixed texts, like the Constitution, like the Bible, like law. These were the foundations of our culture, and everything referred to them, and that produced a certain kind of thinking where we would go to the authors who became the authorities, and that kind of authority sense of relying on authority for what's true and how we live our lives. That's all revolved around these sort of fixed texts. But now we have screens where everything is very fluid and changing, and streams of flowing bits of data through them. And there's lots of consequences of that. One is that we don't get our sense of what's true from authorities. We have to kind of assemble it ourselves. For every expert on the internet, there's equal and opposite anti-expert somewhere else. Every fact has an anti-fact. And so there is a sense in which we have to cobble together our own sense of what's true. We need other kind of critical thinking skills. Questioning authority is now the default instead of the authority. So these all have lots of implications. Running a world on screens has lots of implications about the culture and leadership and how people behave and what they believe in and what they think is right or true. Mm-hmm. And so understanding that the screen culture is operated on flows, the things are liquid, things are always becoming in the process of change. Nothing is finished like Wikipedia. There's no final version. These have tremendous effect on people's ideas of a career, on what they're looking for, what drives them to do something. And so I think I think these kinds of a trend, which I said have been going on for at least a decade or more, but will continue to amplify in the next couple of decades. So the screening that we're going to see, we're now going to cover almost every surface with screens. They've become so cheap. If you've been to cities in Asia, the entire cityscape is a screen.
This is profound, isn't it? I mean, because in this part of the screen, I was struck. I mean, I made some notes on this piece. I mean, you talked about the book, culture being driven by, logic, but the screening culture being driven, technology rules, if you like. I mean, you also talk about the, you touched on it just a minute ago about the, book reading. It's about it amplifies your analytical skills, whereas screening, in your language, you're developing skills of pattern recognition, real-time thinking. So these are very, very profound implications at the personal level, but also at the societal level as well.
Yeah, exactly. Right. A lot of people are very kind of worried and alarmed at the kind of flitting that we do, surfing on the web and flicking through Tinder or being on Facebook and tweeting. And it seems to them very superficial, but I actually think that there is, in a certain sense, this appropriate response to this flood of information that we need to kind of be scanning, that this kind of positional, ever quickening scan is really is really a skill that we have to acquire, and I think we need to perfect. I don't think that necessarily every teenager is doing it properly, but this is what I talk about technoliteracy. I think that we have to train ourselves. Literacy, we spent 4 or 5 years learning how to read and write. It wasn't something we could just do by hanging around books, and you can't learn calculus by hanging around math. You have to actually apply some deliberate practice to learning it. And I think there are going to be some skills, critical thinking skills, that are going to be necessary to prosper and survive in this environment, and learning how to scan, learning how to question authorities, learning how to question anything you read is part of that skill set. But I don't think it's necessarily something you can just do or learn by osmosis. I think we may have to actually be trained in the best practices. And
So for a leader of an organization, I mean, getting specific, of an organization facing disruption, let's say leader of a Detroit motor company or a German auto manufacturer, I mean, what should they do in the face of these waves of disruption? And what kind of skills do you think they will need to survive?
Yeah. So I mean, when we were doing hiring at Wired, my little motto that I used internally, which was, we hired for attitude, trained for skills. We actually didn't hire for skills, because skills were always becoming your internal, constant, perpetual newbie. So the skills that even kids graduated from college didn't have the right skills that we needed, because what they were taught was a couple of years old, and we needed something that was now. So we were much more interested in the attitude, the ability to learn, an attitude of kind of going with the flow and understanding flows, and all these other things were much more important than the actual specific skill, which needed to be learned on site or in the process. And so that would be one thing I think that you need to do in your companies, which is to understand that you probably have to instill the skills within. I mean, you may not be able to hire them. You may actually have to generate them. So this idea of lifelong learning is going to take place in the job. And that's part of what the career is, to the extent that we have careers. That's what it's about. It's about constantly learning. And so you are going to become a teaching company no matter what you're doing. Just like no matter what company or what business you're now in the data business. No matter what company or industry you're in, you're also in the teaching business. And so I think that just has to be part of the process. This kind of constant training, education, skill acquisition. That's what you're doing. That's whoever you hire. It doesn't matter what language or what skills they have. They're going to have to learn new ones within 2 years. And so, are you capable of teaching them, or not? Yeah. Co-teaching is actually the word I would use. Co-teaching. They're going to teach each other, and that's the thing. It's like you don't. It's not like it's peer-to-peer. That's the other. It's decentralization. Is you're going to have them. Your workers are going to teach each other. And so, can you facilitate that? That's sort of what you're doing. Can you lead that in that sense?
And then I think, I mean, the concept here. I mean, there are lots, as you say, there are these 12 forces. I mean, some of them are very, very specific. Where you talk about adding, AI to a product, which and Uber is a great example of that. But I mean, are there some specific areas in those 12 out of which some strategies are almost like no-brainers to prepare oneself, or is it not? I mean, or maybe there's a baseline of, as you say, co-teaching one another. There's a curiosity, the ability to continue to learn and adapt. I mean, are there any other things that you would say any CEO, irrespective of industry, geography, maturity of their company, needs to get really good at to survive and thrive?
I do. So if we were having this conversation 150 years ago, I would say, hey, no matter what business you're in, you have got to understand that the Industrial Revolution is coming. Everything will be automated. We have synthetic power. Things that were done by human muscle and animal muscle is going to go away, and you have to understand the general dynamics of automation and industrialization. Get up with it. We're having the second industrial revolution now, which is AI, and no matter what business you're in, it's going to be affected by AI. And so, what the industrial revolution is we had synthetic power. Okay, so when you drive a car today, you have 250 horses in your car. You have access to the power of 250 horses, and we're going to do the same thing right now with AI, which is kind of delivered in the same way electricity is being delivered. You don't generate it; you just buy it off the grid. You buy as much AI as you want or need, and you'll have 250 minds or 250 brains to do whatever it is that you want to do. Okay, and so if you're not doing it, your competitor is got 350 brains working on it. So you have to understand that this is going to affect individual careers, individual tasks, individual jobs, the whole ecosystem of commerce. Because I think whatever you can take whatever X you want, and you can add AI to it. That's the formula for the next 10,000 startups. It's just find something that we previously electrified. Now we're going to cognify. We're going to add intelligence, smartness to it. And so this is huge. It's going to affect education. It's affect food, transportation, agriculture, you name it. And it'll affect lots of people's own jobs and tasks, because a lot of the tasks in each job can be newly automated, not just with power, but now with intelligence and cognification. And so all our jobs are going to change. That's big. That's really big. And then I think people will be paid by how well they work with these other entities, these other forces, these other AIs. Just as, we have interpersonal skills, there'll be another set of skills for being adept at working with these bots.
Yeah. So this is, I mean, it's the I'm not sure who, there was a book a couple of years ago about the rise of the robots, but I think they were saying that being able to position yourself between machines and humans is a reasonably safe environment to find yourself in for the foreseeable future, essentially.
Between machines? No. I mean the humans. I'm saying instead of working against machines, we're going to work with machines.
Yeah, absolutely, yes.
So this is the idea that some jobs will go away, but most jobs will just be transformed because some of the tasks that we'll do will be done by the AIs. So AIs are mostly replacing tasks rather than jobs.
Yep.
So you just have to get good at, some people will be better at it, but it also relieves other people to actually become very impersonal. Like I think, things like bedside nursing. Okay, that's a very interpersonal skill that becomes extremely valuable. Because it's not a commodity, because bots can't do it, because it's all about being human, and that's where we're going to be spending our money. Anything that can be specified as an efficiency or productivity is something that the robots will do. So if you have a task where efficiency is important, that is a task that AIs will do.
Yeah. I mean, another of the trends that you talk about, or the forces, which I found fascinating, was the one around questioning. And I found it fascinating for a couple of reasons. I mean, firstly, because I think you talk about a different type of a number of different types of thinking. Well, you touched on it earlier on. Screening gets you to think in a different way, and then you talk about a number of different types of thinking, methodologies of thinking, which are going to come to the fore in this new environment. But questioning, I mean, often leaders are expected to have all the answers. They're expected to be able to provide clarity, which is increasingly difficult even before you've read your book, but it becomes even harder once you understand how these forces are going. Can you say a little bit about what does questioning mean for someone, again, trying to navigate a large organization through some of these waves of disruption? How important will this be?
Yeah, I mean, I think we'll come to realize that sort of answers are for machines. The machines do answers the best. That if you want an answer, you ask a machine. In fact, this was a very famous Pablo Picasso quote, and I actually tracked it down. He really did say that. He said the problem with the computers is that all they give you is answers. But that's the benefit of computers, is they give you answers. And with Google and AI coming along, basically we'll get answers for free.
Yeah.
And they'll be ubiquitous and instant and accessible anywhere. And they'll become extremely complicated answers, things that are you ask someone and they don't know. So again, the thing is that we will work, humans will have this accessible to them. So the answers will come from the human plus the AI, but that's how doctors will work. They'll do a diagnosis, but they'll be working with an AI as a team member, as a partner. But the thing is that the machines are better at making answers than humans. And what humans are much better than AIs and machines is asking questions. And a good question will become ever more valuable because machines can't do it. And so I think in general, it's not just questions, it's the whole idea of also failure, of also of uncertainty, of not knowing. So in a certain sense, every time we ask a question, we get a couple answers, and then we get even more questions than we had before. That's how science works. And so in a certain sense, science is actually expanding our ignorance faster than it expands our knowledge. And that's a good thing, because it's in that frontier of the ignorance, of the unknown, where all the opportunities are. And what I think humans or a good leader is going to be, is dealing with this uncertainty, dealing with helping us get through. Because I think, as humans, we are not comfortable with uncertainty. We actually talk about change, but we're actually not comfortable with change either, and we're making more of it all the time. And so, part of being a great leader is going to be able to, navigating, taking people through this expanding territory that's of uncertainty, of ignorance, of ever expanding the unknown, and asking the right questions. It's not just, as Peter Drucker says, it's not just doing things right, it's doing the right things that become more and more critical. And so how do you know what the right thing to do is? That requires a kind of a meta level of asking the right questions. And I think the art of asking the questions, and there are good questions and bad questions, or better questions, I should say, that becomes the thing that will be most valuable. And when when we're hiring people, I think one of the things you're going to be asking is, what kind of questions? How good are their questions? And I think, we have a huge emphasis, very rightly, on innovation, but innovation is primarily failure. 99% of the things that you try are going to fail. And if you don't have the high failure rate, you're not asking the right questions. You're not really doing the right innovation. The same with science. Science is a very inefficient process. If you want to be efficient, don't do science. So efficiency is not the metric that you measure science by, because it has inherently this built-in huge failure component. And that kind of being able to steer our way through huge amounts of failure, huge amounts of inefficiency, huge amounts of uncertainty, that's what leadership is going to be about, is being comfortable in that kind of an arena, in that kind of a space where that's the norm. And yet the very real human tendencies to be afraid, to be worried, the kind of fears that we're seeing, people like Trump drumming up right now, are natural when all this change is happening. But so you have to have leaders that are going to actually try to control and manage that, and really be able to offer guidance and offer a vision and all the other kinds of things that leaders need to do to get through that, because that is where we're going to be living.
Yeah. And I guess for the individuals, when you talk about education, this sounds very much like a sort of multidisciplinary education that gives you multiple frames of reference, different perspectives, different mental models, if you like.
Absolutely.
Is that something that you? I know your children are a little bit older than ours, but is that the kinds of things that you would equip that your children with from an educational point of view?
Yeah, my son we had the privilege of homeschooling for 1 year in 8th grade. It was really one of the best things we did for him. And from his point and our point of view, the schools that he eventually wound up going to were very like, for instance, this high school required all the students to take the obviously college prep kind of students. Besides all the AAP advanced course, they all had to take woodworking, glass blowing, metal shop, electronics, fabric sewing, glass, because that kind of well-rounded making, the kind of maker viewpoint of just trying things in order to learn was an essential component, I think, of this multidisciplinary education. And I think no matter what school you're in, you have to. This is my parental advice: is no matter what school your kids in, you're gonna have to supplement the things that aren't there. So there's no perfect school. This one will have some advantages over the other, and then your life is kind of filling in and compensating for these other dimensions. And I think that this idea of trying things is a big thing that I think is a meta theme in my books, which is that the only way we can know what technology is good for is by using it, by trying it, by engaging it. That we can't prohibit things. We have to embrace these things. We try and embrace, and it's by embracing them and using them that we can actually find out whether they're useful to us personally and what their right role is in society at large. And that it's through use and engagement and embrace that we get those, rather than through prohibition or trying to undo them or turn them back or in some ways outlaw them. And so I definitely would say, like, for corporate leaders and stuff, by far the best way is to actually have an honest implementation of these new media, new technologies, and actually use them, and through use, which there'll be lots of failure. And again, corporations and governments are very allergic to failure, but they have to be less allergic. They have to tolerate more of these small experiments. So you want to fail forward. You want to have constant small failures instead of these large big ones. And part of the failure will be coming into trying things, and not just in trying them kind of intellectually, but actually through use, to actually having people use them. So there's no way you can kind of become a information-based, AI-based company unless the people themselves are engaged in it. The employees themselves are engaged at the lowest levels. It's not something. I'm not talking about like having skunk works. Yeah, that's good too, but there has to be. The program was talking about eating your own dog food, in the sense of you've got to really be doing it and trying it at a fundamental level.
Yeah. I was at a VC event yesterday, actually, Kevin, and there was a guy talking about, the VC was talking about the payback, and the corporate VC was talking about the learn back. So they want to make money on it, but they actually want to take this learning from their investments in third-party organizations and actually process that back into how they do business themselves, which I thought was quite a nice term, actually.
Exactly. Yes, that's a lovely term, learn back. And so learning is the is the new currency, and that is and you learn by failure, you learn by asking questions, you learn by doing and making, and so the company that learns fastest, makes the most money, basically.
Yep. So I'm curious. I mean, as I mentioned, I'm an anthropologist. I mean, what does all of this mean for the bottom of the pyramid? What does it mean for the Nepalese farmer, for instance, who maybe has one screen on their iPhone or their Samsung? Because I mean, it's very easy to get. We sit in very privileged positions in society where we can access these technologies and enjoy them, but the bottom of the pyramid, your Nepalese farmer. I mean, what's this mean for them?
Yeah, well. I mean, the important thing for the Nepalese farmer is the fact that he does have one screen now. Because when we were talking about this, we being people like myself talking about this 20 years ago, everyone the question people say, what about the digital divide? And the question was, what am I at Wire going to do about the digital divide? And I said at the time, I'm not going to do anything about it, because the amount of profit involved in making sure that the Nepalese farmer has access to this is so strong that the worry is going to be more like, what happens when everybody's connected? That's going to be what we're going to worry about, not how we get everybody connected. So the Nepalese farmer, even though people did not believe it at that time, that within 20 years the Nepalese farmer would actually have a supercomputer in his pocket, that's happening, and I think will continue to happen. I think the questions about not how do they get access to this, but the question is, how do they get clean water? How do they get how do they get solar electricity? That's how do they get roads? For the Nepalese farmer, that's what they're concerned about right now. They still have the basic infrastructure that is missing, and I don't think we can leapfrog over them. I think that I think you can leapfrog a little bit to get maybe something kickstarted, but I think you still have to, build the roads and we'll bring in electricity and have the hospitals. That you can't just have the cell phone and nothing else. So that process is, we know how to do that. That's known. It's available. And when people are connected, those bottom billion. They're so eager. I mean, I spent a lot of time in China. I just came back from India and Kerala for a while in the backcountry. I've been everywhere in the most remote parts of China. I just came back from Oman yesterday. It's amazing how fast people like that are grabbing the opportunities that they have and building the stuff themselves. Okay, so they don't need development. They just need an opportunity, and they will build it as quickly and quicker than we can even imagine. And so I'm not so worried about that part. I'm much more worried about what happens when everybody does that, and and the kind of friction that rapid development puts on the society, and from going from a very traditional medieval society to with kids who are just tuned in all the time, and the kind of spillover and the quality of what happens with their jobs. And so the development I'm just not that worried about, because there's so much pressure, economic pressure, to make that happen, and so many people eager to do that is going to happen. But I think the other issues about who do I identify as, who am I, what's my relationship to this new world, what do I do with it, I think those are much more challenging issues.
Yeah. Well, I mean, because there's two pieces here which I'd just like to pick up on. One is in your lovely example of what screening looks like. I was struck by you said, we all sit down for dinner and screening is not allowed at the dinner table, which was very explicit. And that's, as a parent, we're always trying to get our kids to put down the iPhones and go. So, and then the second piece, maybe, and you can comment, because I think they're both very similar, is I think you comment a conversation you had with your father where he talked about, don't you want possessions? And you talked about liberating, feeling liberated, and, the more hunter-gatherer life. But we are humans, with fewer possessions, which is great. But on the other hand, we do want, I think humans want relationships. They want a connection with land, and obviously hunter-gatherers. That relationship to some extent is broken. So, I mean, how concerned are you? Because you did touch on it. This friction. I mean, how do you think? How can we lubricate this friction, and how big is a problem do you think it is that we're facing here?
I think it's huge. I mean, I think some of the results of the Arab Spring, which we're still repercussions going, reverberating through the entire world in a certain sense. We can have the technological infrastructure happen, but our views of our role in the world and the cosmos actually become more and more important. So I think we're kind of on this, we have 100-year identity crisis ahead of us. And it's not just the developing world, it's us, but I think it's even more acute in there because of the speed of the change. I mean, we've had 150 years industrial revolution, but places like Nepal or whatever, they're going to do the industrial revolution and the information revolution and the post-industrial revolution all within 10 years. It's like totally, it's like, wow. And so the question of like, who are these young people at the end of, what's their identity? What are they for? What's their role in the world? I think it's uncertain. And I think that's going to play out in terms of like if they're frustrated, if they're unemployed. This is where this is where you get wars from. This is where you get unrest from, and I think being able to and let's talk about China, let alone Nepal. China's going 1,000 miles an hour into the future, but they have no idea where they want to go. They don't. I mean, Americans at least have some kind of an idea of the American dream. We have some idea of what we think America's role in the world is, even though other people may not agree with us. We know what it is, and so. But what's China's role? They don't know. They don't have the China dream, and so this is starting to play out in the sense of you're going so fast, but you don't know where you're going. that there needs to be answers to that. And I think this, in the AI and the genetic engineering and another layer to which is like, what's a human? What are humans good for? What's our role in this? What's our job? If we thought we were, tool makers, but other things can make tools too. So obviously we have to redefine ourselves. And so I think, I think these intangible, almost philosophical questions are going to become much more important to try to answer. And again, back to the role of the leadership, I think this is one of the things that leaders will be doing is trying to put into context, into kind of even in terms of the cosmos, why are we here, and what are we doing, and what's your job, and what's our role? And I think maybe these kinds of questions were dismissed as sort of philosophical, but I think the philosophical is going to become incredibly practical in very, very quickly. Because if you're talking about anthropology, well, we're in a whole new Anthropocene, which has a whole nother. We're remaking our entire culture right now, and I think what people in the past had a very clear idea of who they were generally, and certainty about their relationship in the cosmos, and that's not there anymore. Both in the developed world and in the developing world, as they become developed. And I think that's one of the first things that breaks. And I think we don't have good answers right now for that. Why am I working so hard? People in China, I'm working all the time, but what am I working for? I got money, and then what? I can't breathe. The air pollution is so bad. So Nepalese. The thing about the Nepalese farmer is that they're just beginning to ask that question, but in 10 years or 20 years, they're all going to have the same generation of youth with the same questions unanswered.
Yeah. And of course, if they look to us as having the answers when we're actually beginning to ask these questions even more, that makes it even worse, doesn't it? Exactly.
Right. So we can't give them good answers right now. Yeah. And so that's exciting. It's thrilling because we don't know the answers to it, but I think that is sort of the general drift of and what I'm thinking about and what I kind of worry about. For instance, I'm not really worried much about technology, but the one thing I am worried about is whether we will have whether we will treat our AIs and robots like slaves. And whether or not they really are slaves, but whether we will have a kind of a slave position or a slave master position to them really does concern me, because I think that does affect your soul, your mind, your culture. And
that gets in. I think that's touching to this distinction you make around singularity, the soft singularity versus hard singularity, right?
Yeah. So for the listeners who may not know, the singularity is this term stolen from physics and cosmology, which is that there's a horizon beyond which you can't see anything. So like around a black hole, all the information flows into a black hole. So there's some point in which you can't see beyond, and it's unknowable. And Werner Vinge was a mathematician, science fiction writer who applied that to our own future, saying that if we could have an intelligence explosion, make an AI so smart that it could make another AI smarter than itself, and then it could compound up, it would suddenly have an explosion of intelligence that would leave us behind. We couldn't see what would come after that. He called that the singularity, and Ray Kurzweil has sort of made that into a trope, into a myth, that in the year 2040 or something, this will happen, and the AIs will kind of become so smart that they'll solve all our they'll solve cancer, they'll solve immortality, we'll live forever. If you can just live until 2040, you'll live forever. That's the hard version of the singularity. It's kind of like the rapture for the nerds, because it's kind of like God is coming in the year 2040. Yeah. And I think it's very, very, very unlikely for a number of reasons that I don't have the details to go into right now, but I think it's very, very, very unlikely. But I do think there is something in the soft version of that which says that basically globally we're assembling a very large superorganism. We're connecting all 7 billion people together, and we have all these trillions of machines and AIs that we're making, and we're all connected together. And we will have a network, a system, the technium, as a whole planetary system, and that it will exhibit basically phenomena or behavior that does not exist in any of the parts. And so there will be a planetary superorganism that will, in some respects, be unknowable to us. So there will be a singularity in that sense of we won't be able to see what's happening in a certain sense because things will be happening at a planetary scale. And just like there's the whole definition of a system is behaviors that aren't present in the parts, the system will behave in a way that none of the parts behave. And so that's what I'm forecasting for this holos, this planetary machine, human, biological thing where all of us, all our machines, all the AIs connected together exhibits behaviors that aren't present in any of the parts. And so that's kind of a singularity in the sense that it'll be hard for us to see what's coming.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And Kevin, I'm mindful of time, but also there was. I'll put in the show notes. I mean, there's loads of other things that you're doing beyond writing, and you've done. I mean, there's lots. The Rosetta Project, the Long Now, a number of your work on languages. But my final question is there something else that you want to that you really want to achieve? I mean, you've filled your life with many other lifetimes of work, if you like. But what's the next big project on the horizon, or what else do you really want to achieve?
Yeah, that's a good question. The stuff that I've been talking about, AI, virtual reality, are all kind of current hot topics, and there's a lot of money flowing into it. There's a lot of people interested in it. It's an important. It's going to be the main events in the next 20 years, and I've decided that I wanted to kind of pursue something that nobody else was interested in. So I have this idea that that everybody that I talk to thinks is a really bad idea, and I think it's a good idea. And so that's one of the messages to me is that this is for me. This is what I should be doing because nobody thinks it's a good idea, and that is I become very interested in, and a proponent of world government. I believe that we need and have to have and will eventually have a world government, a system, a policy, an institution of world government. And, my friends on the left think it's a terrible idea. The friends on the right thinks it's a terrible idea. Nobody thinks it's a good idea. But I think it's because of Star Trek, it's like an inevitable idea, right? I mean, you visit any planet in the galaxy who has a certain level of technological advance, and they'll have a world government. So it's very hard to imagine how we get there. In fact, it's also very hard to imagine how we could have a truly representative democratic governance with 7 billion people. I mean, how does it even work? Yeah. How do you vote, or, is because the levels of hierarchy might be so severe that it's not really significant? I don't know. The UN is probably the least democratic institution that we have. So I'm not talking about the UN. I'm talking about, a real working world government that would do world police, that would do world sheriffing, that would do world justice. And I have no idea how we get there. I have no idea what it looks like. I only have a belief that it's something we should be working on.
But it's interesting you say that, because there are clues in your book. This idea of Bitcoin being based on covalence, which wasn't a word I ever heard. Right. That's a clue towards what you're talking about, right?
Yes, right. So in covalence, for people who haven't read The Inevitable, is this idea that surveillance, which is they are surveilling, they are watching us. Is uncomfortable and is sort of hellish in a certain sense. The premise is that just as the internet is the world's largest copy machine and wants to copy. Technology wants to copy, and everything will be copied that can be copied. You can't really stop the flow of copies. In the same way, the internet and this online world, this digitalization, is the world's largest tracking machine. So in 50 years we'll be tracked even totally than we are right now. In fact, VR is probably the world's most severe surveillance system we can, because everything inside of VR is being tracked. And I think that what we want to do, though, is we want to have some way to bring symmetry back into that. So if I can watch who's watching me, and I can know about them just as much as they know about me, and I have some control over what they know or what they use the information for, and I get some benefit, I call that covalence, because it's going both ways. It's symmetrical. That makes it much more civil. And so part of the challenge, I think, is not to stop the tracking, which is impossible, but to try and introduce the mutual symmetry back into it, which makes it much more reasonable.
Yeah, palatable for everyone concerned. Yeah. Kevin, I've taken more time than I expected, but I found this fascinating, and thank you very much for your time. Quick, where can people get in touch with you?
KK.org is my website.
Wonderful. Okay, we'll put it all in the show notes. Really appreciate your time. Very, very glad that we finally managed to connect. And thanks very much, and best of luck with the book.
Great. Thank you.
Many thanks.
Yep. Bye-bye.
Goodbye.
Kevin's book is so rich, as indeed is his experience, that the interview was always going to be rushed. A few things really stood out for me. Some of the themes, like cognifying, which is articulated by this concept of taking product X and adding AI, is really thought-provoking, and as a way of looking at business opportunities can really stimulate some fresh insights. So I do urge you to get a copy of the book, The Inevitable, and go through the 12 trends that he outlines and see which of those are applicable given your context. The importance of learning as well as teaching, or co-teaching as he calls it, will shape what leadership looks like going forward. And while the book is really optimistic, our interview ended on a more worrisome note. For instance, with Kevin being concerned about whether we choose to treat AI and robots as slaves, with the resulting negative consequences on, as he says, our soul, our mind, and our culture. Nevertheless, there are lots of great nuggets and takeaways here, and I'm thrilled that his book is doing so well. Next week, we have the voice of the millennial generation, Gerard Adams, on the show. As an accomplished serial entrepreneur, he describes his journey and explains why entrepreneurial skills are equally important for people working in large organizations as they are for startups. So you've now got some more knowledge, but knowledge, as we know, isn't power, it's only potential power, and it's all about execution, taking some action towards your goal. So I urge you to start applying some of the concepts straight away, and I don't think you can start any better than grabbing a copy of the book, or at least looking at some of the reviews and thinking, how can you apply it? Now, what many of our listeners have told us is that they can use the transcripts that we produce for each show to do this. So go ahead and download the Kevin Kelly transcript, which is on www.innovationecosystem.com/1818. And there you can review the conversation and pull out some of the themes and see what works for you and your teams. And if you prefer pictures, you can look at the visuals we made for this episode. And other than that, thanks as always for listening. If you liked it, please pop a review on iTunes. As we know, these shows do take time and resource to put out there. We're thrilled with the response we're getting, and as always, would love to hear more from you about how it's working for you and what value it's bringing. We want to get our work further out into the innovation ecosystem for entrepreneurs and executives to benefit from. So thanks for your help on that. Have a great week.